Well, welcome to our Fundamentals of Ethics class, Basic Ethics, on Contractarianism, the social contract theory from chapters 13 and 14. It's the attractions of contractarianism, and we're going to look at a few of the problems that it has. So get your books to chapter 13. It's page 194. If you want to follow along, take some notes. You will need some of this information for the quiz that will be in this class. But I'm going to just do a first real quick review of a few things. Review is about normative theories that we've discussed at large. Okay, there are 5 of them. The 5 normative theories we have covered, you remember what they are? All these letters here are reminders of the different theories that we have covered in class. And I really wish we had face-to-face class. I think it's more interesting. We probably get more out of it. We can certainly discuss more, and I can answer any particular questions. Always, if you have a question, please email me. The first normative theory that we need to just be reminded of, I'm not going to go over them all. I'm just going to remind you of the N is normative theory of natural law. That's what the N stands for. DC. Never really thought about it. It's not about DC Comics or Washington, D.C., but it's the divine command theory. And the cons, or the U, consequentialism or utilitarianism. The E would stand for egoism, and I will make a differentiation here on that one in just a second. And then the last one we did is deontology. So these are the 5 theories. We're getting into consequentialism, so that is number 6, and there's a couple yet to come, 7 and 8. So here is about egoism, I think. Well, we'll have some other reviews. So what is the definition of ethics? It's basically the discussion of the human behavior of what is right and wrong. That's what I'm looking for in the book. It's a discussion. It's about humans, and it's about doing right or wrong. It's that kind of discussion. That's what ethics is about. What are the ABCs of ethics? Agent, behavior, consequences. And the autonomy, it rings true. We have to have freedom to make these choices. If we're coerced into something, if we're forced to do something, it is not autonomous, and it wouldn't be ethical. And our responsibility then is lessened when we are forced to do something. And in fact, it may even be totally denied our ownership of or responsibility for anything if we don't have autonomy. What are the 3 general areas of ethical studies? Hopefully you remember this. The 2 areas we've discussed, one in the middle of discussing, normative theories. There's metaethics earlier, and it's a bunch of questions. You know, how does this fit? What is it exactly? And then applied ethics is really how is this applied to a specific arena of life, say the arena of law, or that of medicine, or that of sports, or something else. Applied ethics is where the rubber really does meet the road. Metaethics is a lot of questions about is it really good, and where does this work? Is it ethical or not? How do we fit it in? And normative is the actual workings of the framework of how you make the decisions. So I've been illustrating it as we're the driver in the metaethics. It's the meta is the me as the driver. I have different ideas. It's our worldview kind of thing. Normative is the driving tool, whether it be a car, pickup, it could be a motorcycle, or a bicycle even, unicycle for that matter. And then applied ethics is where are we going exactly? How is it going to be? Where's the rubber going to meet the road? So what's the difference between the descriptive and prescriptive statements? These are all questions that will be on the final. That's the reason I'm reviewing these. What's the difference? Descriptive are descriptions of the situation, and prescriptives are commands to do a certain thing. Should, have, ought, shall, you must, you have to, sort of thing. Ought and should are the two, and ought isn't even on here. But going on. Two types of egoism. One is psychological, and it's really descriptive of the human beings, of the human race, of our human position, as we're described as psychological beings, and it kind of sets forth what we do. We're pretty much selfish. We're interested in our self things and so on. Ethical, though, is promoting the idea that you should be interested in doing things for yourself, and you ought to do everything you can for yourself. That's the difference. Ethical egoism is about doing it for self because that's what you ought to do. Psychological is just a description of who you are as a human being in this world of human beings. What's altruistic? Well, it's thinking of others above yourself for their benefit, doing things for them, not getting any benefit out of it yourself. That's altruistic behavior. Some people don't like it. It flies in the face of ethical egoism, which is prescriptive, because you're doing things for other people. You're being altruistic. We had a discussion on that, but that will be on your final exam as well. Morality and religion, there are a couple things that come up, and that is Euthyphro dilemma. The two questions are, if you want to put it on pause, see if you can come up with these two questions by yourself. If not, I'm going to just throw them in your face. It's good because God said so, or you might say it's holy, or it's right, or it's wrong because God said so. Or did God say so because it is good, right, holy, wrong, whatever? Your placement of good might be different. But is it good because he said so, or God said so because it was actually good? Hopefully you're recognizing the difference between those two questions. What's the normative theory related to this? It is the DC theory, the divine command theory. All right, so just a quick review of deontology. There's a lot of stuff in that, but we're going to look at just once again and finally before we get into contractarianism. But first, it is about consistency and fairness, universalizability of maxims. It is about being rational. And if not, you are immoral. If you're not rational, you must be immoral. Immoral is irrational, and irrationality is being immoral. Hypothetical and categorical imperatives are two kinds of groupings that distinctive things that you should do or that are in the maxims. The main virtue in deontology is integrity. Again, remember these things for your final. That's why I'm reviewing these things. Immanuel Kant is the guy about deontology. Richard Hare shared an idea about slavery and maybe gave you a little bit of insight to maybe slavery isn't so bad after all. It's a good contractarian, not contractarian, but rather consequentialist or utilitarian theory because it benefits more people in a lot of different ways. So Richard Hare had a challenging thought on slavery. Autonomy and the principle of the humanity. We have to have free will, and there's some challenges about who is human exactly, and the challenges in that human community that we'll get to, and what is goodwill. He talked about that in deontology. There are five problems with the principle of humanity. And that is, and here I left these short just to see if you could figure them out. Hopefully I'll have them for you in my mind. It's about vagueness. It's a bit too vague. It doesn't have clarity. It doesn't have the specifics we need to work with for the principle of humanity. So there's some problems in the sense of vagueness. It doesn't determine the just deserts or justice. What do people really deserve? So that's a question. Do they really deserve an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, a whack for a whack, and a rape for a rape, and a burn for... Okay, we're getting a little weird, but that's the question. It talks about autonomy. One must have their own personal ability to make decisions and freedom of their will. Is there such a thing as moral luck? That's what luck is. Do we have moral luck, and are we just luckily going through life? And there's a scope of more calm. It's the moral community. More calm is about the moral community. Who are they? And what age are they? How much mental capacity does one need to have to be a part of the moral community? Well, that's a review on deontology. Today we're getting to contractarianism, again, page 194. How do we start? Well, the moral guidelines are based on where we have common ground, where we can all agree, and then we go from there. We make rules. Okay, the golden rule we've maybe heard. I'll remind you that it is doing unto others you'd have them do to you. Consequentialism and deontology, they all have this kind of a concept of where we're starting, and this idea is a proceduralism. It's a certain procedure, and that's what it's talking about in this. There it is, proceduralism. The golden rule is, what do you want done to you? Would you do that to others? For consequentialism, what's the best outcome for the most amount of people, and how can we have this work? For deontology is, well, is it universalizable? Can we get everyone? Is this a maxim that could be generated for everybody? Is slavery a good thing? Most people would say no. There's another procedural concept that we'll be talking about, but these different things are called proceduralism. And the idea is you kind of have to work through a little bit of a problem before you can really start. So here we are. It's about contractarianism. There's a procedure to use in it as well. First contractarian agreement found in Rome, really. There's probably some that were earlier, but the ones that people have used in this particular study is about Socrates. And he believed he had a contract with the state of Greece, and that we all did. That is, we being those people who lived in Greece at his time. Excuse me, but we have a contract with our state, whether it be Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, the state of Maryland, or whatever other state we may be living in. The idea is that we all are all part of a organization, a grouping of states called the United States of America, and we have a contract with that. It's kind of what's behind this idea, and we'll talk more about that as we go through it. There was an implied contract between Socrates and Athens, and it's a city-state thing. Athens is part of Greece, and his punishment for breaking this implied contract was death. So he had to drink his bowl that would bring death, and he was willing to do that. What do? We're nature by nature. We're self-interested, and our deepest goal is to lord it over others. It seems we all want to be on top. No one wants to be the patsy. So what do? We form contracts to curb our self-interest and to cooperate under certain conditions. Contractarianism is it started as a political theory, but as it developed, there are 3 points of a just law that need to be recognized in a contract. All people are free, all people have equal part, and the people making them are rational people. These three come up over and over and over again in this chapter, and these are the 3 parts of contract theory. Okay? The rational people would agree to this contract, whatever it is. Only rational people would agree to it as a basis of a cooperative life together because we're free and we are equal. With a condition that others obey these rules too. Everyone has to be, that would be part of being equal. Everyone needs to obey. You sign on the dotted line maybe or whatever, you're agreeing. Well, here's the deal. We are competitive by nature. We're competing for the same amount of goods maybe, or I want more goods, actually. I don't want the same amount of goods. I want more. But goods are limited. There's a limited amount of resources. There's a limited amount of goods with unlimited desires. Each of us having a desire maybe to be better than the rest, to be smarter, to be better looking, to be faster, to be stronger, whatever. But maybe to have more power, maybe to have more status than other people. So some people resort to doing things that they shouldn't do, or we would think that they shouldn't do normally, like stealing or robbing banks or such, because we're competitive by nature. The limited goods we are looking for are possibly food, money, power, or just stuff, any kind of things. Hey, I want a bunch of those. Books, stuff might be, hey, I want jewelry, or I want pants, or I want pairs of shoes, or I want 50,000 different motorcycles, whatever we might want. The resources, whatever they may be, are limited. But we have all sorts of interesting thoughts and competition, so we compete to get them. Some people make a deal, so we get caught. And now what do? We made a deal on a pinky swear. We made a deal somewhere else, somehow else. What happens? How do people bargain? And what do they bargain away? Well, in getting contracts, we bargain away a certain amount of freedom. Either our stuff or our time or equity or sweat, energy of some sort. It might be freedoms of other kinds. Here's the dilemma. It's called the prisoner's dilemma. This is created with this idea in mind that we are showing that while we are competitive by nature, we have a tendency to break our own contracts. Because you and I, we go rob a bank, right? And we promise, we pinky swear to each other that if you get caught, you won't say who I am. If I get caught, I won't say who you are. And I won't tell this or won't tell that, how we did it or where we did it or hid it or whatever. But the reality of it is the people, the detectives that caught us now separate us, separate rooms, and they come into your room and they say, hey, by the way, Doug has just fessed up and has told me all the goods, and we got you. And they'll come up with some other evidence and make it sound like, yep, sure enough, he gave you up. Well, and then you're thinking, now you're mad, and you're going to confess because he gave you up. And well, here's the deal. If you remain silent and you don't say anything, you both get 2 years. And they're saying this apart from each other, so you don't hear this from the same people with your partner in crime. You don't hear it at the same time. If you don't say anything, you get 2 years. If you confess and he doesn't say anything, you get off scotch-free, and that guy, your partner there, gets 6 years, maybe more. However, if you both confess and you both say stuff, you're going to get 4 years. But if you confess and your partner says nothing, you get off scotch-free and they get 6 years. So who's going to do what, and how is this going to work? Well, here's the deal. Most people will always confess in this situation because it seems like the best deal for themselves. Why? Because no matter what the accomplice does, each criminal will be better off by confessing. So they'll both get 4 years. This has been proved over and over and over. In shows, you may see things that are a little bit different, but this is what happens. There is cooperation, but why don't people cooperate better? Well, it's too risky. Thomas Hobbes recognized this, and in 1588, that's a long time ago, this is before America was a nation by 100 years or more, Thomas Hobbes objected. He is the modern writer of contract theory, okay? He recognized that he didn't see them as good. He saw them competitive by nature. They weren't interested in helping other people, and they were out for themselves and at war with one another. Recognized man as being competitive. He wrote a book named Leviathan, and this is about a guy by the name of Fool that went about his business and did stupid stuff. And Thomas Hobbes used this as an idea to illustrate that, hey, we need contracts. And there's another guy that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, but Thomas Hobbes is really the author of modern-day contractarianism. Cooperation and the state of nature. So Thomas Hobbes said that suckers follow the rules and one has to compete to get ahead. So when there's no government, there's no central authority over you, there's no one to enforce any law of any kind, then people behave pretty badly. And that, my friend, is the state of nature. You're in this state when you're, and in this state, only the fittest survive, only the strong win, and you're a war against everyone, so beware. And when people are this way, there's no trust, people are ruthless, cooperation doesn't happen, and this is a terrible, terrible state to be in. This is where Thomas Hobbes says it is the state of nature. And he said this is where people are when there is no government. And he saw this in a civil war of England. That's where he lived in the early 1600s. And it can be pretty bad when people are all fighting and there's a central government is not to be in existence. But we can escape this state of nature by doing two things: by setting some rules and by having an enforcer for these rules. So an enforcer and the rules only do good, though, if people submit to them, right? The beneficial rules require cooperation and some punishment for their betrayal. And an enforcer can ensure that these rules are obeyed and followed up. But they have to be able to be enforced. If not, you're still back to the state of nature where people are at war and competitive and fighting, and just the bigger one wins. Well, what you give up, though, when you put together a contract, is that you give up certain things in order to give it. The rules of the contract are the terms of the contract. These rules require us to give up freedom to attack and kill. Okay, so it's not as bad as maybe you thought, but freedom to lie and to cheat or misinform, you give up your freedom to steal, to take whatever you want, to threaten even. That's not so bad as giving up all freedoms. But you do give up something in order to have a contract. That's kind of the idea behind a contract. The state of nature ends when good rules and a way to when there are good rules and there is a way to keep them. So people agree with one another, give up their unlimited freedoms, and to cooperate on terms that are beneficial to all of us. There must be a centralized enforcer, and that could be who? Well, it could be a king, a mob boss. It might be a pimp. It could be a government of sorts, state, as we see it, or federal, local. What kind of government would it be? Maybe it's God. That's your enforcer. But some sort of central power or government or agency. There might be unions or committees, different levels of different things. They have the power to suspend or disqualify you, to force an issue, to punish you, to press you, and to watch over you. Without this central power, the situation would spiral downhill into the battleground. Warlords, gang bosses, and other competing factions would rise to power unless we have a good contract in play. And really, that's what the organizers of our nation here in the United States had, this concept. But they didn't use it from Thomas Hobbes. They got it from a different guy. And so we'll talk about John is his first name. I'll talk about him in a little bit. But contracts are rules that you agree upon before entering agreement. Agreements are made in many different ways. Now I want you to stop, maybe pause this, and just for a few seconds, to think of 4 different ways you make a contract. What kind of contracts are there? And you can put it on pause here. I'll keep talking and share with you some of these different types of contracts. Could be a handshake. You might have a signed contract with several signatures. You might just your signature, or you might just be your word. Hey, a person is only as good as his word, right? It might be the right of birth. You are by birth, you are in contract with the United States of America. If you are a U.S. citizen, that's your contract. Trading of goods for money. Okay, your contract might be for $5.55 plus tax. But what you're doing is trading. You're making a contract with that person, trading this amount of cash for that particular item you want. That's a contract. You might use a credit card, and there are different kind of contracts and different kind of credit cards. You might have an email and a passcode. If you sign up for something, I signed up for something the other day and realized I had to give them my email, and then I had put a passcode once they give me the email, and then I put in my own password, and then there it went. Hey, I'm signed up. We've got a contract. We have an agreement. We might just use a phone. Any more phones are used as a contract, especially online for things. Some form or sign of agreement. Syllabus is a contract, as far as the school is concerned, between the student and the professor. But there are several contracts. There's the exercise of these contracts. This would be an experiment that we would do in class, an exercise. But it's talking about what kind of contract. Would you do this or would you not? Do you think she should get paid? Let's read it. Sarah wants to get paid $5 per snow for shoveling the snow off your driveway. She tells the Wilson couple, married for now about 6 years. They nod their heads and smile at her. Okay, she goes on. It snows 8 inches. She shovels their sidewalk, their driveway. They look at her through the window and smile. She finishes. After a bit, she goes up to their door and asks for $5. The Wilsons don't pay. Should she have gotten paid? Why or why not? That's the question. Different types of contracts. So specifically, there are 3 that we're going to talk about. And actually, the complicit one is not one we're going to use in the class. But the implicit is this first one. It means implied. And explicit is another one we will use here. And it's written out very clear. It's explicit. It's one that no one can confuse. I mean, it's perfectly clear, written out. Implicit is implied. It may not be clear. I think a waive is kind of an implied contract. Shaking of a hand could be pretty explicit because you said words, you shook on it, and you said, yep, that's the deal. Couldn't be any more clear. You could write it down. That doesn't make it more clear. It just makes it more reliable in a witness and a testimony of court, because you have something to show for it, but it didn't make it any more clear. And then there's a third one that we're going to look at in the next chapter. It's called tacit consent. And that's kind of what you have. So that's the consent is a kind that you have. Tacit consent is the kind of consent that you give to our government. Well, okay, I live here. I don't say anything. I'm not objecting to it. I'm not opposing it. You silently agree and you just go your merry way. That's tacit consent. It's kind of like being complicit, but we're going to use the tacit consent. That's why he uses it because he uses it this way in the book. There are other kind of contracts. And I'm not looking for implicit or explicit or tacit consent type. I'm just saying there are contracts you probably have part of today. Now, and I'm going to just talk through this rather than have you work through it too much. But you might think, hey, is there a contract that you've worked on today? Well, maybe you've worked on this class, so you're working out the contract you had with the school and with the professor in a classroom. That could be a contract. A contract by turning on the light, you've agreed that you will pay the bill. Okay, it'll be a couple weeks, or maybe a month, but that's a contract that you agree. Utility bills, water, gas, electric, phone. You've agreed to pay for that. If you use the phone at all today, you are using part of your contract. You're in contract with whoever you signed that with. If you drove, you have a contract with the state. You have a driver's license. It shows your name, and you're supposed to fulfill and be obliged to follow the laws. If you put a mail in a letter in the mail, that's your contract. You've paid for the goods, and you said, hey, will you take this to so-and-so's place? And that's a contract. So there are a lot of different contracts we do, and there are more, many more. Contractarianism emphasizes individual empowerment because you are making the contract, you are agreeing to it, whether implicitly or complicitly or explicitly, or like I said, tacitly with your consent. You are agreeing to the contract. So it is empowerment to the people inside that contract. Implicit contracts are problematic. You remember what implicit means? It means implied. It's not very clear. I think an implicit contract is when people are kind of, well, yeah, okay, and not really clear as what they're okay about. Are they okay about hearing what you said, or are they okay about and agreeing to what you said, or that they heard it? Yep, I heard that. That's kind of the way I say sometimes, and it gets some people riled up because I say, okay, and they think I agreed with them for their contract insinuation. And I'm just saying, well, yeah, you said that. Okay. And that makes people mad. I think it's kind of funny because sometimes I do that on purpose. But contracts, implied contracts, are really challenging. Is it an explicit? I'm going to ask you to differentiate between the two. How can they be misunderstood? You need to learn to answer that question for the quiz on contractarianism. Social contracts. Thomas Hobbes said that there are different strengths of people are different in strength. We're cunning yet equal. There's a certain limited amount of goods for there. People are competitive, and that always ends up and leads to war. One way to keep from war is to have a sovereign government. Thomas Hobbes was about a big, strong, sovereign federal government. There must be some institution in place for social contracts to be valid, and it would be inside a governmental group. Another guy said earlier, his name was John. It's John Locke. He had a theory of social contract. He was very different and opposed Thomas Hobbes, in the way of thinking. John Locke felt like people were basically good people, and they wanted to do, they're competitive, but they're cooperative, and they want what is good for the other people, generally speaking. God made man to live freely in society, and man freely gives up their liberties in nature to enhance their comfort and safety in this societal structure. So you can see here John Locke is probably from a divine command theorist. At least he believed in the Bible. And in fact, in the history of the United States, John Locke is one of the most quoted men by our founding fathers. And he had a really strong theory of a social contract, and really the theory that the United States government institutions are based on is from what John Locke said, more so than from what Thomas Hobbes. In fact, I'm not sure they quoted Hobbes at all, but they quoted a lot from John Locke. The argument for contractarianism: people are autonomous. Each individual seeks to maximize their prudential interests. The best way is to have contracts with one another. And explicit is clear and concise. The foundation of all morality is demonstrated by entering into contracts. And this is certainly Thomas Hobbes' idea. There's benefits of contractarianism, and we're going to go through these. There are 9 of them. And then we'll highlight the other parts of the next chapter. This is a long video, I realize, but you can cut it up into parts and then summarize it. But morality is a social phenomenon. If you're on an island all by yourself, there is no need for contracts. It's based for people who are living with others. We need contracts when we're amongst a group. Contracts explain and justify the content of moral rules. They illustrate for us, why we need these rules. John Rawls, he came up with this idea of the original position. And in the book, page 201, he talks about the veil of ignorance. And what he was doing was trying to get people to just think you're put in original position is putting, like taking away who you are in the century and just putting in a place. And now we're in the woods and we're going to set up our own contract. And this is an imaginary device, the veil of ignorance is, to where you don't have any identity of social or racial. There's no religious affiliation. You don't have an age. There's no sex. There's no economic distinction. It's just that we're all equal. And we all have this desire to be in a contract and to make the best benefits for all of us. Well, you can see the challenges of that. First of all, we're not all equal. Not everyone is the same, and we don't have the same ideas. But we do have to work together in a society. John Rawls is just a guy who wanted people to use this idea of the veil of ignorance to get there. Rules of cooperation must be designed to benefit everybody, not just one single group. There are no special interest groups, and there's no laws just for minority groups is kind of where he was going with it, because it needs to benefit everybody. So you can see the challenges that John Rawls had. Benefits of contractarianism. They justify all our moral rules, and they explain the objectivity of morality. They don't explain how, but they do explain that there is some truth out there, whether there's God or not. The fact is, morality can change over time. The objectivity of morality, and it can change because people change. So there are objective values through groups. It explains it's sometimes acceptable to break moral rules, because the idea of having contracts is through the basis of cooperation and trust. And if there is no trust, no cooperation, then hey, people are bound to break the rules and do their own thing and try to recreate new ones. Justifies a basic moral duty to obey the law, and to escape the state of nature, one has to gain, and so to gain all the good things that come from a stable and peaceful society, you have to learn to be obedient to the laws. The laws don't work, the whole society and your contract breaks down if there's no obedience. And then this seventh one, I believe, is the contract. It justifies legal punishment. It shows that people can be rightly punished. Punishment needs to happen if you want to deter people from doing bad. And if you want a deterrent, punishment has to be able to happen. Then there's some final benefits. There's two things here. One is that contractarianism justifies the state's role in criminal law. There's two kinds of law out there. One, a law is civil. That's repairs, that's personal claims and personal wrongs. And then there's criminal law. And that's the law that preserves and protects the state and all of the advantages that the federal or the state provides. So that's the differentiation between civil law and criminal law. One's against the state and the other one's against a personal person. And it justifies the role in this criminal law. And then lastly, contractarianism gives citizens an opportunity for civil disobedience. When the laws seem unfair and they're discriminatory because they don't benefit all the society, and you feel like, hey, yeah, this is true, and we need to stand up. We need to let people know. The point of having society under law is to be equal, fair, and beneficial to all. And when that is not happening, then some people can protest. They use it. This is the four parts to the protest, though. Civil disobedience is protesting. They need to use this as a last resort. They've sent their letters to Congress and to the powers that be. No one reacted. No one said anything, so they're going to do civil protests. It's a last resort. They act openly. There's not secrecy about this. They're doing it in front of all. They're nonviolent. Oftentimes they're doing it in front of violent situations. In the 60s, I remember this when I was a kid, that there were a lot of black people being violently opposed when they were practicing civil disobedience because they just wanted to go to the same school as other people, or ride the bus in the same way as other, or drink from the same water fountain. They were nonviolent, and they were right. They should not have been separated or segregated based on color. And many of them practiced nonviolent and open civil disobedience. And they're motivated not just out of personal gain, but for justice for all. And it worked. That's a great example in our own personal history here in the United States. But it gives citizens an opportunity for civil disobedience when they see that the law is not equal, fair, and beneficial for all. Arguments against contractarianism is similar, I think, to one of the problems of the human condition, and the principle of humanity is it's a little bit vague sometimes. Now, there should be clarity and explicit rules, but why be moral at all is the real question. What about the fool and Leviathan, the decisions that he made? You know, sometimes, and we didn't read it, it's not assigned, but this fool went through, and sometimes he felt it beneficial to do things that were wrong, illegal, or immoral because he could get away with it. Why not steal? If it benefits me, hey, I'm an egoist. I'm interested about myself. Why not? Well, that's the free rider problem. How about people in our nation that just sit back and don't do anything? They just benefit from the rest of us because the rest of us work pretty hard. Well, that's a free rider problem. And if I can get away with injustice, why not? If I can get more money or possibly more resources and win when I'm not caught. However, Hobbes would disagree with this. He would not say that, though, virtue is its own reward, but he would disagree with people not wanting to step up. But the challenge is, how do you make people step up when they don't want to? Like telling a slug or a snail to run fast. They just can't or won't. So maybe being unjust at times makes sense, and it does to those people doing it. So it's a challenge. It's just pointing out that there are challenges in contractarianism as a theory of moral decision making. Role of consent is that, again, we got back to the explicit or implicit or the tacit kind of tacit consent for the kinds of contracts. Revolution or evaluation, you sit back and just agree silently. Okay, you go along with stuff, and then you rise up and do civil disobedience. Well, that's the role of consent you're giving. And then there's a disagreement between contractors or among them, because we are not all alike. We're not all going to want the same things all the time, and maybe that's why some people would want us to have different contracts. That's a possibility. And then the scope of the moral community, back like it talked about in deontology. Who has rights? Who has respect? Who deserves respect? When creating contracts, who will we protect? Are we protecting anyone? Is there a real ability to have beneficial contracts for everyone all the time? Being self-interested isn't necessarily being selfish, but it is a challenge in contractarianism. If contractarianism would work, what happens if people are corrupt? I want you to pay attention to this. If people are corrupt, what's going to happen? Well, here's the answer. If people are corrupt, then the result will also be corrupt, just as Adolf Hitler and Adolf Eichmann in World War II times and in other times now. If people are corrupt, then the results will be corrupt. And I think a lot of people would argue that maybe this is what's happening in our government even today. But who knows? That's it for Contractarianism. About 50 minutes. It's not totally the end because you need to write a summary of this. Put the summarization of this video in an MLA8 formatting and a timely submission into Red Zone. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next time.